Greetings and welcome to Cat and John's almost live story half hour, brought to you from the rather overcast and windy fishing village of Little River, Nova Scotia, Canada. Juno and I are going to say hello, Juno. Hello, Juno. Look who's that. Okay, bye, girl. So I'm Jonathan White, and you are going to be taken on a interesting adventure today. My intention with these readings, as you know if you've been following them, is to kind of take you away from the craziness that's going on in the world today. Today is May 3rd, 2020. We're about 2.5 to 3 months into this coronavirus situation. So, what I'm going to read today is a continuation of the last 2 weeks of stories as I make my way back from the war that was about to break out in India and Pakistan, across Pakistan, Afghanistan, Iran, and into Turkey. And today's story is called The Turkish Mountain. Now, don't forget, if you enjoy my stories, to please subscribe and click that little bell thing there, because that will let you know when I've got new stories, and they're pretty much released every Sunday morning. And a quick shout out to Andy, who's known as Gordy Shuttlebus here, for his help in loading them up, to uploading them onto YouTube. So, without further ado, he says, putting on his glasses, I will be reading from the third book in my trilogy. It's called Everyone Said I Should Write a Third Book. And this tale is entitled The Turkish Mountain. Jake drove through the night after leaving the town of Mashhad in eastern Iran. He was angry and uptight and kept muttering at the injustice of just having spent a night in jail. I wasn't too thrilled about it myself, but as it was Jake's fault, and I had angered him trying to extricate ourselves from the mess he had created, I kept quiet as I lay in the back of the Ford Transit van trying to keep warm. We were driving west to Tehran on Route 44, a smooth highway that was a main route between the two cities. It was cold in late December, and even with the heater going full blast, it was barely enough to keep the back of the van comfortable. He kept up a steady speed of 50 miles an hour, and 14 hours after leaving Mashhad, we pulled into Tehran, a bustling city full of American cars and trucks, donkeys and rickshaws, the modern alongside the ancient. Jake drove straight to the American embassy, intending to let them know how unfairly we had been treated by the local police in Mashhad. I told him I thought this would be a futile gesture, as he had caused the whole mess, chasing some kids and knocking down a lamppost. But he wouldn't let go of it and stormed into the embassy, determined to get revenge. 15 minutes later, he was escorted out by a U.S. Marine through the courtyard and instructed to keep driving west out of Iran. This was late in 1971, and the country was governed by the Shah, a brutal dictator, a puppet of the U.S. who had installed him there. It was early morning, and Jake was now more pissed off than ever. He slammed the transmission into gear and drove crazily through the streets, looking for Route 2 to Tabriz. I held on tight as he yelled at other cars and constantly blew his horn. There had been little communication on the drive from Mashhad, and he was surly to his girlfriend Mary. I was in the back of the van with a lunatic driving, 1,500 miles still to go to Istanbul. Snow was falling lightly as we reached the highway. Luckily, Jake was not suicidal, and he slowed down and fell in behind some trucks going about 30 miles an hour. 100 miles down the road, as they had slept little in the jail and were exhausted, we pulled into the small town of Kazvin and found a cheap, fairly clean hotel. The next day was grey and overcast, and we continued along Route 2 and reached Tabriz, a large city in eastern Iran, the next evening. Again, a cheap hotel, my own room, a meal of kebabs and rice, and a good night's sleep. The following morning I felt sick. My intestines were acting up again. Jake couldn't care less, and I lay on the back, breathing slowly and hoping not to pass out. About an hour north of Tabriz, at Marand, we left the main highway which continued north in order to head west into Turkey. Now we were on an old two-lane road, Highway 32, which was bumpy with potholes. Luckily the snow had stopped the day before, so Jake could see the road and stay on it. But we couldn't average more than about 35 miles an hour, as we were getting into some hills and also had to watch for herds of sheep and goats slowly moving down the road, bleating and crying. The traffic had thinned out, and sometimes we wouldn't see a vehicle for an hour or so. As we made our way west, I lay shivering in the back. My fever had returned. We bumped and jostled our way over 200 miles that day. About 5 hours into the trip, we left Iran and crossed into Turkey, 15 miles west of the town of Maku. After the border inspection, which went very smoothly, we stopped at a small house by the road. Inside, a family wearing old, dirty, smelly traditional clothes fed us fresh, warm goat's milk and rice. As we sat and ate, about a dozen children shyly poked their heads over the windowsill and looked through the ancient low door. They ran away giggling whenever we made eye contact. I don't know if it was the goat milk, but within an hour my stomach had settled down and I was no longer feverish. We spent the night in Dogu Bayazit, just over the border, about 1,000 miles east of Istanbul. In the morning, as we drank strong, sweet Turkish coffee at a small restaurant, I asked the name of a mountain I could see about 10 miles off to the northeast. There were actually two pretty mountains, side by side, covered in snow. I was told the large one to the east was called Agri Dagi, the Turkish name for Mount Ararat, where Noah's Ark was purported to have settled. The temperature was freezing, and we could see our breath as we prepared to leave. More ominously dark, foreboding clouds were moving down from the north. The past 2 days we had been steadily climbing, and were now at an altitude of around 5,000 feet, about the same as Denver, Colorado. In the parking lot, I spoke with a truck driver who knew a few words of English. He warned me of a mountain pass just east of the city of Erzurum, about 150 miles away, that would be treacherous if there was snow on the road. I relayed this information to Jake, who gave a disinterested grunt and appeared in no hurry to move on. At this point, he seemed to derive some satisfaction in aggravating me, probably because I had shown him to be a moron when he acted so foolishly back in Mashhad. Eventually we headed west, and should be in Istanbul in 3 days, if road conditions stayed clear. They didn't. Excuse me. This was mountainous territory, and the road was either climbing up or dropping down into pretty valleys. Within an hour, the clouds rolling in had developed into a storm, the temperature dropped below freezing, and snow started to fall. We crawled along, sandwiched between several overladen and wobbly lorries, Jake quiet and focused on keeping the van on the road. It took us 6 hours to go 140 miles, and by mid-afternoon we were only 20 miles east of Erzurum, our destination for the night. The snow was falling steadily, big, wet flakes that stuck to the road. I reminded Jake about the mountain pass ahead and the warning I had received from the truck driver that morning. "I don't care what he said. I'm a great driver and we'll get over this pass with no problem," was his abrupt retort. I looked out the rear windows and could barely see the headlights of a big truck behind us through the swirling snow. The conditions were getting worse, and half an hour later we were forced to stop on the road. Bundling up as best I could, I slid open the side door and stepped out into a cold, bleak landscape with a low, grey sky above. Crunching through the snow, I could see dozens of trucks ahead of us, all stopped with their engines idling. There were several groups of men huddled together, and further up someone had managed to light a bonfire. I told Jake I would find out what was happening. As I trudged up the road past the snow-covered trucks, the storm lightened a bit and the snow stopped falling. It was still very cold, and a foot of fresh snow covered everything. The warmth of the fire was comforting. There were about 20 men standing around, talking and gesticulating. I offered them all cigarettes, which were received with thank yous in Turkish and Persian. One man spoke a little English and told me that the name of the village we had passed through 2 miles back was Passinlair. It marked the beginning of the narrow road over the mountain that rose steadily another 2,000 feet before dropping down into Erzurum, 10 miles away. "It's very dangerous road," he told me. "Sometime truck slide, is correct? Slide? Off-road, down mountain. Sometime we stay here 2-3 days. Just then a heavily laden lorry crept past us heading east, honking his horn. "Well, he drove over the mountain pass, yes?" I asked. "Oh, he is. He very lucky." We moved into the middle of the road, and I saw where it snaked up over a ridge and disappeared around a bend about half a mile ahead. It was a very narrow 2-lane road with steep drop-offs on either side, as it was built atop a thin ridge. "How many kilometers is the road over the mountain before it becomes flat?" I asked. "Oh, is 10 kilometer," he replied. About 6 miles of treacherous, snaking, slippery road, up over a mountain, then back down the other side. No guardrails, nothing to stop you falling into the valley far below if you skidded off the road. "Are you going over the mountain?" "Oh, it's possible in 1-2 hours. I watch weather and see if truck come from west. Talk to driver." I walked back to the van half a mile down the road and relayed the information to Jake. He was keeping warm with the heater on. "Well, I'm going around these trucks to the front of the line anyway." He rolled up his window and I followed him back on foot as he inched past the waiting trucks. He pulled over near the bonfire and got out. Mary stayed in the van. She was scared of the storm, scared of the truck drivers, scared of this nasty road, and almost seemed to be going into shock. I didn't know why she had gone on this adventure. She certainly didn't have the spirit for it. We stood around the roaring fire, talking desultorily with the men. Suddenly, there was a series of loud horn blasts coming from the pass. We all looked up as a huge truck started down towards us from the mountain pass to the west. It was an old cab-over Mack, probably shipped to Turkey from the US after every mile had been squeezed from it on the interstate systems. Hooked to the tractor was a beat-up flatbed trailer, and strapped on the trailer was a pyramid of logs, about 20 of them, as long as the trailer, which was around 50 feet. Another blast from its horn, and everyone stopped talking and stared intently at the truck, inching down the steep grade in a low gear, engine loud in protest. The driver tapped his brakes, and the rest of the trailer slid a couple feet to his left. Probably the only working brakes were on the tractor. It was unlikely the trailer brakes were hooked up, and if they were, they didn't seem to be working. This was a potentially dangerous situation, as in the best of conditions, it's imperative that the wheels on a trailer are capable of braking. Otherwise, the trailer can keep going when the brakes are applied. The truck picked up speed, and the driver obviously tapped his brakes again. This time, the trailer slid off to the right and tried to overtake the tractor. He took his foot off the brakes. The trailer straightened out, and the whole rig sped up. So he was caught between a rock and a hard place. If he braked to slow down, the trailer would slide out under the huge weight of the logs. If he didn't brake, his rig would gain momentum and hurtle down the winding, slick road, going faster all the time. We stood mesmerized. About 40 truck drivers from Turkey, Iran, Russia, and a couple of Western hippies, stamping our feet in the cold, all watching the drama unfold. And then, catastrophe. The diesel engine was doing its best to keep the truck at a slow speed, straining in what was probably low second gear. Oops, got to turn the page. How embarrassing. Oh, here we go. About a quarter mile from us, we heard a loud bang. Awful metal grinding sounds. Black smoke came out of the exhaust stacks, and the truck started going faster. The tired old diesel engine had blown up, and with it, the braking effect of the engine decompression. Within a few seconds, the rig was traveling 20 miles an hour on the slippery surface downhill, out of control. The driver panicked and stood on his brakes. The wheels on the tractor locked up, and the rig started to swerve. The trailer, still going downhill with no working brakes, tried to overtake the tractor, and within 5 seconds was sliding sideways. There was a slick of black engine oil darkening the snow behind the tractor. The trailer was skidding and was now at a 90-degree angle behind the tractor, uncontrollable. And it was heading down the mountain toward us. Men started yelling and running towards their parked trucks, slipping in the snow. If the runaway rig crashed into the line of trucks, it would be a disaster. Several of the trucks were carrying gasoline from the oil fields in Iran. And rather than wait in line with everyone else, Jake had arrogantly pulled the van up to the front. It was about to be demolished. Mary had opened the door and was scrambling out. She was in such a panic, she slipped and fell into the slush. Jake was frozen to the spot. As I ran to help Mary, I heard an ungodly sound, screeching, groaning, snapping. I stopped and looked back at the rig. So did everyone else. It had been maybe 5 seconds since I had turned away to help Mary, but in that 5 seconds, all hell had broken loose. The back of the trailer had gone off the road, over the side to the left, and was pulling the rest of the rig with it. It was happening less than 1,000 feet away, and as the grim scene unfolded, it seemed to be in slow motion. When the trailer wheels had gone over the edge, the trailer had twisted, which snapped the chains holding the logs on. The loud noises I had heard were the logs freeing themselves from their restraints. The trailer was now more than halfway over the precipice, and most of the logs were bouncing down the mountain, making a fearsome echoing noise. The driver was trying to get out of the cab. We could see him frantically pushing his door open. If he jumped, he would hit the road at over 30 miles an hour. If he didn't, he would go over the side with his truck. And then, like something out of a special effects movie, within a few seconds, the rest of the trailer went over the edge and dragged the old Mack tractor with it. The sounds of its death throes reverberated around the mountains as the logs tumbled into the precipice. The trailer jounced after them, and the tractor shattered into 1,000 metallic pieces and burst into flames, tumbling over and over as we ran to the edge and looked down. A group of men raced up the road, slipping and sliding, towards something dark laying still in the road near the edge. Well, that was the end of part 1. I will continue part 2. If you